And we are back with another episode of the MMA Pick'ems podcast, where we'll be breaking down UFC Fight Night, Lewis versus Daukaus. And this will be the last fight night of the year, so hopefully we can end it on a bang. Overall, the card does look pretty solid. The main event looks decent. Could be a bit of a hit or miss here, depending on whether or not we get that knockout. Stephen Thompson once again rounding out the last card of the year. We have some other prospects on the card as well. Lemos, Gamrot, and a few veteran fights as well. So a pretty decent card to end out the year. Then we'll have a pretty long break, nearly a month off until the next event. So hopefully we could cash on this event. But like always, I do want to quickly recap the previous event. So, coming off of UFC 269, pretty crazy card, lots of upsets this card. Happy to have come away with a bit of profit still. But let's dive right into it. Kicking off the early prelims, we have Jillian Robertson versus Priscilla Cachoeira. I did have Robertson in a parlay, which unfortunately did not cash. I'll go over that a little later, but she was the first leg of it. Figured she'd have a pretty clear advantage on the ground, and she was able to dominate Cachoeira on the ground, was able to get the submission despite the most egregious eye gouge ever. But on the feet, definitely still very concerning for Robertson going forward. She's, I think, going to have some pretty tough matchups against fighters who could keep it standing and, have just a little bit of boxing. So, moving forward, Randy Costa, Tony Kelly. Yeah, I did take a small shot on Kelly here. And then also took Kelly to win in round 2. Also had the under parlay in this. Yeah, the under parlayed in this fight. And then took a small shot on Costa to win in round 1 just to basically, I think, cover all the bases here. I think I triple dip this fight. But Randy Costa fights are, I think, pretty straightforward. He hasn't shown that he's got, 3 rounds of cardio. Well, he hasn't shown he's got more than a round and a half of cardio. So, definitely look to fade that. Thought he'd be a little more dangerous in the first round, but I think Kelly came out with a very good game plan, looking to pressure Costa early. Didn't even let Costa get his offense going. Looked to just drain his gas tank right from the get-go. I think that was very solid game planning his part, because sometimes the best defense is just offense. And, he was able to just smother Costa early, never let him get going. And once they got into that second round, Costa was pretty much done. Round 2 prop cashed once again on Kelly. And going forward, that's going to continuously be the play here. It's always take Costa's opponent in the second round, assuming he's still in the promotion, or just take Costa in round 1. The guy really hasn't shown he's got decent cardio, hasn't shown any improvement there. So he's going to have to make some big improvements if he wants to have, continued success. Otherwise, he's just going to go back to crushing cans in the regional, knocking them out early. But moving along, Ryan Hall, Derek Minner, not too much to say about this fight. Meme level fight here. Derek Minner showing, pretty poor fight IQ. But at the end of the day, I don't think anyone was really surprised by the outcome of this fight. So let's move along here. Miranda Maverick, Aaron Blanchfield. I was actually surprised by this outcome. Just thought Maverick would be able to make it a bit more competitive in the grappling department. Just a terrible read on my part. And a pretty bad look for Maverick, honestly. She got dominated pillar to post. Wasn't able to put up much resistance. Didn't really get much of her offensive, grappling going as well. But, good on Blanchfield. She's looking pretty legit here, looking like the more legit prospect. But yeah, I think Maverick's got a lot to work on going forward. Not much else to say there. Andre Muniz, Eric Anders did take a unit shot on Anders. Obviously that didn't pan out. But yeah, I didn't go too heavy on this just because I felt that Anders, while he has shown improvements at the end of the day, I do think he's just a mid-level fighter at best. And Muniz, the guy is super dangerous in terms of his submission skills. And ultimately, Anders was just kind of unproven on the ground as well. So I didn't want to go too hard on this. I thought that if it was standing, maybe he'd have a bit more of a shot. Not the best read here, but, we move on. So going in the preliminary card, we have Jordan Wright, Bruno Silva. I took Wright to win in round 1 and then also took the under in this fight. I had it parlayed with, I think, the Tony Kelly, Randy Costa under as well. That cashed pretty easily. But, Jordan Wright to win in round 1 was like plus 800, which, was a little ridiculous. Wright, is someone who does start strong early and does have, all of his fights pretty much ended in the first round. So I think if he was to win it, likely be in the first round, and plus 800 did seem a little ridiculous there. And it did look like Wright was doing a bit of damage to Silva early, but once Silva got his timing down, once he got a read on Wright, the fight was over. Just landed clean on him. And Wright, not exactly the most durable guy in there, and not exactly the most defensively sound fighter either. So didn't cash on Wright round 1, but did cash on the under. And then moving along, Augusto Sakai tied to Ivasa. Had a 1.5 unit shot on Sakai, and then also a half unit shot on Sakai to win via decision. So really not much to say here. I think Sakai's chin might be done. I thought that, if this does get dragged out, over the course of 3 rounds, we'd see Sakai maybe just outpoint to Ivasa, maybe just outwork him a little bit, work him in the clinch, and just win a pretty close decision. The decision prop was like plus 300 almost, so thought there would be a little value there, but it turns out Sakai's chin might just be gone. Don't think he'll do well against any of the power punchers in the division, and at heavyweight almost anyone can crack. So Sakai's probably just gonna be relegated to beating up wrestlers or something, because against strikers he's probably going to struggle, and there's going to be a big mental aspect to this as well. 2 knockouts in a row, all in pretty devastating fashion. That's going to be pretty rough for Sakai going forward. But moving along, Pedro Munoz, Dominic Cruz, took a unit on Dominic Cruz to win via decision. Honestly expected to see round 2 and 3 Cruz for all 3 rounds. Obviously Munoz was able to clip Cruz, but Cruz showing a phenomenal durability there, phenomenal heart, probably feeling super vindicated making that comeback. And outside of that knockdown, I just felt that Cruz was in control of the fight. Overall, Cruz, I think, is just a superior fighter. Much better, footwork. I think he's a bit quicker as well. Munoz really just has that leg kick, and, that obviously is going to be a concern, for Cruz. But, Cruz has been able to deal with it. He knows that's what fighters are looking for going into this fight. And if Munoz doesn't have that leg kick, then I really don't know if he's going to have too much success against Cruz. And, Cruz showed that. Pretty much dominated Munoz outside of that first round. I think Munoz got a little lucky there landing that shot. But, Cruz was able to coast to a decision here like he always does. Didn't think he'd get the finish over someone like Munoz, who super durable, and someone like Cruz, not exactly the most power either. But we move along here. Josh Emmett, Dan Ige. Took a 1 unit shot on Ige. Not too upset about it, even though Emmett won. I felt that Ige had a lot of opportunities in the 3rd round to steal that round. But, I think Emmett was able to just barely outwork him. But I do feel that had Ige, turned up the volume a bit, he could potentially have stolen that round. But, we're getting plus 150 or so on Ige. And, overall can't be too upset about that play. So we move along. Raulian Paiva, Sean O'Malley. O'Malley was the second leg of my other parlay here. Look, like I was saying last week, I just felt that O'Malley's the far superior striker in this matchup. Paiva, historically, I think has been just a bit of a weight bully at 125. And moving up to 135, he's not even going to be the quicker guy in there, the less skilled guy. Very, porous defense. Overall, just felt this was an extremely favorable matchup for O'Malley. The only way I really saw O'Malley losing this was if he somehow hurt himself again, which I don't think was going to be a super high probability. And he ended up getting the job done here, so we move along. Kai Kara France, Cody Garbrandt. Ended up staying away from this fight because I just did not know what Garbrandt was going to look like, moving down a weight class. And, very concerning for Garbrandt. 1-5, I think, in his last 6. So, you just don't know what Garbrandt's going to do with his career at this point. I think his chin is gone at this point, as if, his last 3 knockouts weren't, confirmation enough. I think this is pretty much the nail in the coffin. I don't think Garbrandt is necessarily done in the UFC. He'll have to make some pretty big changes to his game. I think if he wants to have any more success at the UFC level, he'll probably have to just become a wrestler, or at least have a pretty heavy wrestling game plan. It's pretty apparent now that, he can't have prolonged striking exchanges with guys. I think anyone with a bit of power over him is going to be able to knock him out. And, Kara France looked super sharp in there. And even after he had Cody hurt, he was very composed, very good with the shot selection. And, he was just landing all of them with very clean accuracy as well. So, good look for Kai Kara France here, and a bit concerning for Garbrandt. But I honestly do think he could look to wrestle a bit, going forward. He's going to be a pretty massive guy at 125, so he can probably abuse that a little bit, but we shall see. moving along, Jeff Neal, Santiago Ponzinibbio had 2-unit shot on Jeff Neal. Very hairy fight. Thought Neal would be a little more urgent with his pace and pressure. That second round, Ponzinibbio won. I thought the first round Neal won. That third round was a little dicey in my opinion. I think it could have gone either way. Not the best bet. I thought Jeff Neal would potentially hurt Ponzinibbio, but I did expect Neal to have slightly more output than he did in this fight. And, a little concerning going forward. I think that Neal might just have, subpar cardio, and he's kind of masking it with a slower paced fight. I thought that if he maybe started to push the pace a little bit more, he'd slow down. So I think that might be why. So, going forward, I do think that that's definitely going to be something I'll keep in mind. But moving along, Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena. So massive upset here. I'd completely written off Pena. Had Nunes in a parlay, and obviously that didn't pan out. But that just goes to show you there's really no such thing as a lock in MMA. And this definitely was a fight I kind of took for granted. But it looks like the cardio concerns for Nunes definitely reared its ugly head here. That was always a bit of a concern, but it hasn't really shown in her recent fights. And that coupled with the fact that, she's cutting down to 135 for the first time in a while, might have affected her cardio. And then she came out pretty strong there, was unloading bombs on Pena, went to the grappling as well, got real close to the submission, but that didn't happen. And I think Nunes might have expended a little too much energy there. And then going into the second round, she was just exchanging in the pocket with Pena, just looking to unload on her, get her out of there. And I think that was honestly a last-ditch effort from Amanda to look to get the win this fight, because she probably knew her cardio was going. That was just a Hail Mary, hopefully, land a bomb on Pena. But Pena showed a lot of durability that fight, a lot of heart, and very, very good cardio. Was able to continue to pressure Nunes, knowing that Nunes was slowing down, and eventually got the submission. So, yeah, what a crazy upset that was. I'm sure the MMA community is buzzing right now, and I think the funniest thing to come out of this was just seeing Kayla Harrison's reaction to it. Seeing her big payday just go out the door there. But we move along. Charles Oliveira, Dustin Poirier did have a unit on Oliveira. Did also take this fight to not go the distance. Had it parlayed up, and both of those cashed. But Oliveira showing the growth he's had, in this game. Obviously, very dangerous jiu-jitsu, but I think this performance really should wipe away any sort of narrative that, he's a quitter or that he doesn't have heart. He was taking so much damage from Poirier, and, he was able to fight through it and eventually find the submission. I really like how Oliveira went to the body early, because, Poirier's historically had a phenomenal gas tank, but, even someone like Poirier who's got, good cardio, it's not unlimited, right? And we saw Oliveira just start digging to the body early, investing in that early in the fight, so Poirier doesn't just run Oliveira over later in the fight. And I thought that was really good game planning. And I know the fight did end somewhat early in that third round, but I do feel had the fight gotten extended, I don't think it would have been a foregone conclusion that Poirier wins those fourth and fifth rounds, or that he'd get Oliveira out of there, just because I thought that Poirier was actually starting to slow down a bit. We saw, the body shots, I think, get to Poirier a little bit. And then, Oliveira was able to get significant top time on Poirier as well. And, being on bottom, taking damage like that does drain the cardio. So I'm not completely sold that Poirier would have been able to mount like a serious comeback in the fourth and fifth round as well. And I actually also took a quarter of a unit shot on Oliveira to win by decision. And I know it does sound kind of stupid given the outcome of the fight, but I did feel that should the fight have been extended, which, crazier things have happened before, I do think that if it went to a decision, it probably would have favored Oliveira, because, if it goes to decision, it probably means that Oliveira was able to survive the striking exchanges. And for Oliveira to have survived the striking exchanges, he'll probably had to have a decent amount of, grappling success. And, just rewatching the Poirier Hooker fight, that fight went the distance. Poirier started to slow down that fight, and even Hooker was able to hit takedowns on Poirier. And, if Oliveira was able to do that later in the fight, I do think that, he probably would have just won a decision there. So at the end of the day, that was just a bit of a hedge on the fact that I took the fight to go, or I took the under on the fight. And so if it somehow went over and it went to the decision here, that would have given me a little bit of insurance there. But overall, a very good performance by Oliveira, very solid win by him as well. Getting another finish. I think he's going to be a very interesting matchup for guys like Gaethje and even Makhachev, but that's a discussion for another day. Anyways, we have a pretty loaded Lewis Daukaus card, so let's get right into it. And in the next fight, we have Matt Sayles versus Jourdain Leavitt, and Sayles is the -120 favorite. Comeback on Leavitt is +100. And don't have too much to say about this matchup. I think it's fairly straightforward. We have your typical striker versus grappler matchup here. Sayles is the striker in this matchup, and he is coming off of a 2-year-long layoff. But overall, I just don't think too highly of Sayles, if I'm being honest. I think he's a pretty one-dimensional striker. He does have a pretty dangerous overhand right, but outside of that, I don't think he's a particularly high-level striker. That said, he is coming off of a pretty long layoff, so he could be making improvements during this time. But you also do have to factor in, you might have a bit of ring rust coming in there as well. But one thing I did notice with Sayles, though, is he does seem pretty deficient off his back. I don't think he's got good takedown defense, and when you do have him on his back, he does seem a little lost there, and he can definitely get stuck there. He is coming off of a twister loss to Bryce Mitchell. Can't believe that happened 2 years ago, but before that, he was controlled by Kyle Nelson for a bit, I believe in that second round. So, Sayles definitely is someone, if you could take him down, you could probably have a bit of success on top of him. And, that definitely is worrisome since he's going up against Jourdain Leavitt, who is primarily a grappler. His striking is pretty non-existent, definitely seems a little uncomfortable there, but overall Leavitt is someone who is pretty reliable to go to the grappling. Even if he isn't able to take opponents down, he will look to kind of push him up against the cage, control him there. He's not going to spend too much time at distance if he doesn't need to. I don't think I've seen a Jourdain Leavitt fight, take place on the feet for more than about like a minute or so. So Leavitt, while I don't think he's a particularly good fighter either, he is someone who is pretty reliable to go to the grappling. So for that reason, I'm definitely going to have to side with Leavitt here. I think there's a very clear path to victory for Leavitt if he does decide to go to the grappling. I think he could definitely bank 2 rounds, if he's able to get on top of Sayles. I think he can maybe even find the submission on Sayles too, because I don't think that Sayles' submission defense is particularly good either. So I think that Leavitt has a very clear path to victory, and so does Sayles to an extent. I think if Sayles can keep it standing, he can definitely get the better of Leavitt in these exchanges. I really don't rate the striking of Leavitt really highly whatsoever. I think that if this fight does happen to play out, longer on the feet, we could see Sayles potentially get the knockout. He could potentially just touch up Leavitt as well, but I just don't think Leavitt's going to let him do that. I think Leavitt is going to look to get this fight into the grappling realm as soon as possible, and I do think that Leavitt's a pretty sneaky, strong grappler. I mean, I think the fact that we've seen Leavitt just pick guys up and slam him, I think is a testament to just how much, raw strength he has in there. And I know it was against a 40-year-old Matt Wyman, but still, to be able to just pick him up and slam him and knock him out, with that slam, I think does prove that, Leavitt's definitely a pretty strong guy in there. And it wasn't like he was only doing it against Wyman. Before that, he was able to pick up Luke Flores in the Contender Series, brought him next to his corner and just slammed him to the mat. So, Leavitt, I do think is pretty strong in there. And, if he can get his hands on Sayles, I do think he can have a bit of success in the grappling. That said, though, I do think that the cardio of Leavitt is a little suspect. We did see him slow down quite a bit in that third round against Puelles, but that was a pretty high-paced grappling fight. Not too much happened, but both guys were scrambling in there pretty hard for 3 rounds. So, that's definitely very taxing to the cardio. I don't think that Wyman's going to be I don't think that Sayles is going to be putting up that sort of resistance like Puelles did. I don't think that Sayles really is at that level in terms of, grappling or defensive grappling. So I do think that Leavitt's going to be able to implement his game plan pretty well here. I got to pick Leavitt here. I know people aren't super high on him, and, Leavitt is kind of a meme fighter at this point, but I do think that he's got the skills to take Sayles down, either ride him out or potentially get the sub. So I'm going to go with Leavitt here. I'm probably going to put a unit on him. He opened up as a pretty heavy favorite, but got bet down pretty quickly here, which, I don't really agree with. I do think the line should have been closer, but I do think that Leavitt should have been a slight favorite. So I'm going to go with Leavitt here. I think he gets it done via submission. And moving along, we have a pretty low-level heavyweight fight here between Don'Tale Mayes and Josh Parisian. Mayes is the minus 200 favorite. Come back on Parisian is plus 170. And we'll start with Mayes first. So Mayes, he is primarily a striker. He does move pretty well on his feet for his size. He's got decent boxing combinations. He mixes it up pretty well. Just overall, a pretty good, diverse offensive attack here. It doesn't look like he's got a ton of power. It's hard to say, though. He's not fought that much. But overall, I think that he's got good offensive striking, but he is a little one-dimensional in that regard. He's got pretty shitty grappling defense. His takedown defense is horrible. He doesn't look good at all off his back, and really just looks like he's kind of lost on the ground. 3 of his 4 losses have happened on the ground. He's either been just pounded out or subbed. The guy got submitted by Gane. And I know Gane's going to be fighting for the title soon here, but just losing by heel hook to him, I don't think is a good look because the guy is really a kickboxer. But Mayes pretty solid offensively, in terms of the striking, but that's really all there is to his game. But his opponent, Parisian, not much different here. The guy is primarily a striker as well. He's someone who will move forward and throw volume. He's got zero regard for defense, zero regard for his own health. He blocks punches with his face. He is super tough, but, he is super hittable. However, he will continue to move forward and throw volume. So, guys like these always tend to make fights closer than they should be. Unless there's just a massive skill gap, you could just knock them out. But, if there isn't a big skill gap, someone like Parisian always can make a fight a lot closer than it should be. But taking a look at this matchup, I definitely favor Mayes here. I think that as far as the offensive striking goes, I think he's just the much better striker. I think his combinations are much better. I think he's got better power. And, Parisian probably will have better volume, but, anytime he goes in, I think that Mayes is going to be clipping him. But like I said, I do feel this fight can probably play out pretty close. We're going to see Parisian move forward. He's going to get bombed on, but, he's going to be landing his own shots as well. He's going to be taking damage, but it'll look like a pretty back and forth fight. But overall, I do think that, optics-wise, it's going to favor Mayes. I just don't see Parisian being able to just completely out-volume Mayes. He might land a bit more, but overall, I do think that Mayes will be coming out of these exchanges a little bit ahead. And for as big as someone like Parisian is, he does get bullied around in the clinch quite a bit. Roque Martinez was able to do it, and even Parker Porter was able to do it. Guys which had much smaller frame than someone like Parisian, they were able to just control him and bully him in the clinch. And, he'll be going up against Mayes, who I think is going to be a much more natural heavyweight compared to those guys. Mayes, I think is going to actually have the much bigger frame than Parisian. And overall, I just think that Mayes is the much more natural heavyweight. So for those reasons, I am going to go with Mayes here. I feel the line is actually about right. I don't think it's like particularly wide or anything, because I do think that Mayes is just a much better fighter than Parisian, honestly. I really don't think Parisian's UFC caliber, whereas with Mayes, I feel, he's like borderline UFC caliber. Anyways, I just think that he's the superior striker in there. Parisian can definitely make it close with, how he likes to move forward and throw volume, but I just see Parisian taking way too much damage in there. Guys like Porter and Roque Martinez were able to land on Parisian. I see someone like Mayes being able to do the same amount of damage, if not more. So I got Mayes there. I think he wins a pretty clear 30-27 decision. And in the next fight, we have Raquel Pennington versus Macy Chiasson, and Pennington's the minus 182 favorite. Come back on. Chiasson is plus 157. And we'll start with Chiasson first. So Chiasson, she's a very tall, rangy sort of striker. She's got a decent kicking game. She's got good clinch work. She uses her height really well there. Great knees there. And earlier in her career, she was someone who was a bit of a quick starter. Looks to just bum rush opponents, just flurry them. Likes to throw heat in there early. But her last few fights, she slowed it down a little bit, paced herself a little better. Has gone to 3 back-to-back decisions after starting her career, with 5 or 6 finishes or something like that in 7 fights. So I do think that Chiasson's shown some growth and development in her game. However, I do think that she still has some deficiencies with her takedown defense and her ground game. I don't think her takedown defense is that good, and she does seem quite lost off her back also. So I think if, opponents are able to get on top of her, that's likely the rest of the round. But I do think that if Chiasson is able to keep it standing, she is a pretty dangerous striker. And she'll be going up against Raquel Pennington, who is, pretty well-rounded. But, overall, I do think that Pennington is someone who likes to work in the clinch as well. She's very well-versed there. She's great at just holding opponents against the cage. Just looked a dirty box there. And, Pennington, she is a pretty strong fighter. She's pretty durable as well. And, she is, somewhat reliable to go there. The only issue is if she's going up against a more physical opponent, opponent she isn't able to control there, an opponent that, she isn't able to just bully there, she'll struggle a little bit. And we kind of saw that in the Holm and the GDR fight. Obviously those are really high level fighters, but we did see that, if Pennington isn't able to get her, clinch game going, she isn't able to hold her opponents against the cage, she will struggle a little bit at distance and at range. And I do think that's really what's going to be the X factor in this fight. And whether or not Pennington's going to be able to hold Chiasson up against the cage and just kind of grind her way to a victory there, or if Chiasson's going to be able to keep this fight at distance and just look to pick at Pennington. And, I'm definitely leaning on the Pennington side. She's definitely much more proven there. She might just be the more physically stronger fighter as well, but, Chiasson's actually, I think, pretty strong. She's been able to hold opponents in the clinch as well, in her UFC fights, and it does look like Chiasson's actually got some power also, so I do think that at distance, Chiasson's going to be kind of dangerous, but, once this fight does get into the clinch, I expect Pennington to be able to do a bit of work there, and should the fight go to the ground, I definitely do favor Pennington there a bit more. I really don't like what I've seen from Chiasson off her back, so if Pennington is able to hit some takedowns, I think she could win rounds that way. So I just got to go with the much more proven UFC vet in Pennington. And I do feel the line is about right here. I think Pennington should be like a slight to moderate favorite, mainly because of the UFC experience and the fact that she's got, I think, a very clear path to victory with the clinch work and the grappling. But, what's keeping me off from really playing Pennington here is that if she isn't able to hold Chiasson up against the cage, if Chiasson is able to reverse positions on her or keep this fight at distance, this could turn into a pretty hairy fight for Pennington. But I do think that Pennington should be able to get some takedowns here because Lena Landsberg was able to hit takedowns on Chiasson. She was able to control Chiasson for extended periods, and Landsberg is a kickboxer. She's not a grappler. So I do think that someone who's, as well-rounded as Pennington should be able to take Chiasson down. That was a couple of years ago, so improvements may have been made, but if they haven't, then I do think Pennington can have a very dominant performance here. So I'm going to pick Pennington to win here, and I have her winning via decision. And in the next fight, we have Charles Jourdain versus Andre Ewell, and Jourdain's the minus 200 favorite comeback on. Ewell is plus 170, and we'll take a look at Jourdain first. So the guy's a very high action sort of fighter, very wild offensively. He's got a pretty high work rate, decent volume, decent pace. He likes to kick to the body. Overall, just a very good offensive striker, very dynamic, decent power, can definitely crack. He can push a pretty crazy pace as well, but, the big issue with him, though, is he does leave a lot of openings to getting hit. The guy is, pretty hittable overall. That said, though, he's shown a pretty good chin, pretty good durability, and has shown that, he will continue to move forward even if he is taking damage. But overall, Jourdain's a pretty skilled offensive striker who just leaves way too many openings. Can definitely lead to fights being much closer than they are, and it's definitely bitten him in the ass at the UFC level. Like, his fights against Fili and Culibao are really close, and even against Marcelo Rojo, it was a pretty close fight for the first 2 rounds before, the damage just started to accumulate on Rojo. And then again in the Erosa fight, he came in as a big favorite, and he looked solid for a good 2.5 rounds, but it was just taking way too much damage in there, and I think it eventually did get to him. Erosa was able to find the submission. But, even for the first 2 rounds, it was a pretty close fight just because Jourdain does leave a lot of openings for his opponents to take advantage of. And then on top of that, I think the guy's got pretty subpar takedown defense and defensive grappling. He's been taken down multiple times. He's been controlled on the ground, and he has been subbed there. So I think the guy's takedown defense and defensive grappling is a bit of a liability. But going into this fight, I don't know if it's going to be too much of a factor because Ewell, historically, not really a grappler. Ewell is someone who will generally look to keep distance. Work the jab, work the kicks. Not a super high volume striker, but, he is pretty accurate and does stay somewhat busy. So, not exactly high volume, but not like low volume either. But overall, not super high on Ewell at this point either. I think the guy is on a bit of a decline. And I do think that Ewell's got some cardio issues as well. So that might be a bit of a concern going into this fight. But taking a look at this matchup, I actually do like Jourdain here. I've never really agreed with Jourdain being this big of a favorite in all of his fights, and you can make the argument he probably shouldn't be this big of a favorite either, but I do think that he should be able to take this fight. Jourdain is pretty reliable to move forward and throw volume. I think he's definitely going to be outpacing Ewell in this fight. He's just going to have to get past those long limbs of Ewell, but Ewell historically is not a big power puncher, and Jourdain's not someone that's afraid of getting into a firefight. I think the kicks of Jourdain are going to be pretty brutal here. We did see Ewell struggle with the low leg kicks before, and Jourdain not a very heavy leg kicker, but I can definitely see him going there a little heavier this fight. Ewell does stand somewhat heavy on that lead leg, but Jourdain does a pretty good job of going to the body and the head as well, so he can mix it up pretty well with the kicks, and he has pretty high pace in there. So if Ewell isn't able to keep up, I can definitely see Jourdain getting a late stoppage in this fight. Ewell, I think, is starting to slip a little bit. He's been hurt before, and he is coming off of a pretty nasty knockout. So Ewell, I think, is on a bit of a decline. So while I don't think that Jourdain should necessarily be this big of a favorite, I am picking Jourdain to win. I think this is a somewhat favorable matchup for him. Ewell, I don't think, has got phenomenal power, so I don't think he's going to be putting Jourdain out. And Ewell's not really a grappler either, so he's not going to be able to take Jourdain down, submit him, or even get any control time. So I have a feeling this is going to play out on the feet, and if this is on the feet, I do think that Jourdain's probably going to just be landing a lot more. He's going to be doing a lot more. He's going to be moving forward, and he's probably just going to be landing just the heavier shots as well. So I'm going to go with Jourdain to win. I think he could win via decision, but I wouldn't rule out like a late stoppage in this fight either. But official pick for me is going to be Jourdain. I think he's going to get it done. Round 3 knockout. And in the next fight, we have Sijara Eubanks versus Gatto, and Eubanks is the -220 favorite. Come back on. Gatto is +185, and we'll start with Eubanks first. So Eubanks on the feet is, kind of plotty, big power, likes to back opponents down and just unload on him. But, I do feel that overall Eubanks really has had the most success when she's actually able to get her grappling going. And for the longest time, I've just kind of thought of her as like just a marauding kind of brute sort of fighter. But she actually, I don't think, has that much power. I don't know if she's even got that many like knockout victories in the UFC. But like I was saying before, though, Eubanks, I think, is someone who has had the most success when she's able to get her wrestling and grappling going. If you look at some of her previous fights or previous wins, Elise Reed, Julia Avila, Sarah Morris, all fighters that, Eubanks was able to take down and control. And the fighters that she wasn't able to, like Chiasson and Vieira, they were able to get a decision victory over her. So I do think that the win condition of Eubanks is kind of predicated on whether or not she'll be able to hit takedowns in this fight. And it's going to be hard for me to really get a good read on this fight because there's very limited footage on Gatto. She's only had one UFC fight, and prior to that, there's not a ton of tape on her outside of the UFC. There is some footage of her in her fight against Rosa outside of the UFC, but it's very low quality, and you really can't see what's going on there. But it does look like Gatto's primarily a grappler. She does look like she's someone who is comfortable off her back as well. So, she's probably got a decent submission game. Her striking didn't look terrible against Leonardo, but it is Leonardo we're talking about here, so not sure if you could take too much from that. So, yeah, overall, it's kind of tough to get a really solid read on Gatto here, but I'll try my best here. Taking a look at this matchup, I think that on the feet, maybe I do favor Eubanks a bit more. Gatto definitely seems a little unpolished there. But, on the ground, I think is where it gets a bit interesting. I think if Eubanks is able to take Gatto down, she'll probably be able to ride Gatto out on top. We've seen Gatto, play off her back for extended periods. And, if that submission doesn't materialize, she'll just end up, being on bottom the whole round. And, optics-wise, that's not good, obviously. But, I do think that if Gatto is able to hit takedowns on Eubanks, she might have a bit of success there. So it's really hard to say. But I think the main takeaway from this is that I don't think anyone should really be laying minus 200 on Eubanks. I remember taking Eubanks inside the distance against Reed in her most recent fight, but, we had a bit more footage on Reed. And Reed, looked like she was a very green fighter with, very little ground game. So we knew that, Eubanks would probably have a lot of success there. Whereas in this fight, we have, pretty limited footage on Gatto. And we do know that Gatto's, pretty proficient on the ground, so we're not as certain that Eubanks will have success there. And, something to consider as well is that Eubanks is someone who will slow down, and, she is 36 years old, so she's getting a little old as well. So I think that's probably going to be a bit of a factor here. I think that, if the fight gets extended, this could get a little dicey on the Eubanks side. Eubanks historically has not shown good grappling cardio against fighters who have, decent grappling as well. She could dominate other fighters who are, pretty deficient on the ground like Reed or Avila or Morris, but, she goes up against someone who's, got decent defensive grappling like Chiasson or Vieira, and, she's just not able to sustain that sort of attack. So I think that maybe Eubanks can have a round of success against Gatto, but, going into the later rounds, she might fall off a bit, and that's when things could get a little dicey here. So I think it's honestly dog or pass. Gatto, not exactly, looking like a super hot prospect or anything, but, it does look like she's got some strengths on the ground, which could be enough to really diminish some of Eubanks' game. So I'm going to go with Eubanks. I like the experience that she's had. She's, fought at the UFC level for most of her career, whereas with Gatto, she's only had one UFC fight. And she is someone who does play off her back, and, that's a very big concern for me. But I am going to go with Eubanks here, but I don't think it's advisable to lay the minus 200 on her. Moving along, we have a pretty low-level heavyweight fight here between Justin Tafa and Harry Hunsucker. Tafa's going to be the minus 330 favorite. Comeback on Hunsucker is plus 270. And I don't know if I agree with that line at all. I mean, Justin Tafa has routinely opened as a pretty huge betting favorite, and I really don't see why. I mean, the guy's 4-3, and overall is a pretty limited fighter. And once again, he's coming in as a pretty juiced favorite here. He was a pretty juiced favorite in his previous fight against Vandera, and I do remember betting Vandera that fight. But look, with Tafa, I just don't get it with this guy, man. He makes his UFC debut, gets starched by Yorgan De Castro, bounces back against Juan Adams, who was probably one of the chinniest fighters at heavyweight, and I do believe Juan Adams no longer with the promotion. Same can be said about De Castro. I don't think De Castro's with the organization either, but he fights close with Carlos Felipe, which I really don't rate Carlos Felipe all that much, and I think him somehow fighting close with Felipe, I guess, kind of rose his stock a bit, because he goes into the fight against Vandera and is a pretty big favorite against Vandera, pretty much gets doubled up in volume there, so not a good look. But really, after that performance, I just don't see how Tafa could be a minus 300 favorite over anyone in this division. But overall, Tafa really hasn't proven anything in the division, and he hasn't really shown like a very in-depth game either. I mean, the guy's just a very one-dimensional, plotty sort of striker. He doesn't have particularly high volume. You could say maybe he's got a bit of power, but outside of the Juan Adams knockout, he hasn't really shown like devastating power or anything. So I really don't know what people are seeing in him, and I guess it's probably just a fade on Hunsucker, because Hunsucker's definitely one of these guys who's a bit of a glass cannon, definitely kill or be killed. I don't think any of Hunsucker's fights have gone beyond the first round, so I guess people think that if Tafa can maybe weather that first round of Hunsucker, he'll start to be able to pull away later in the fight, which I could definitely see, because Hunsucker is definitely not UFC caliber, and the guy's for sure very unproven. He's really only beaten cans on the regionals, and they're all by very early finishes, so we really don't know much about this guy, should he get extended. And all of his UFC level fights, he's been finished pretty brutally, once by Vandera and the other by Tuivasa. But, as far as what Hunsucker brings to the table. He'll just look to come in and throw heat early in that fight. But, as soon as he realizes that he's not able to get his opponents out of there, he starts to wilt a bit. And, I don't even think he's particularly chinny. If you watch both of his losses, it's just, him starting to look for a way out. It starts to shell up after his opponents start turning it up on him. But, the guy's, I think, got a bit of power. He's got, somewhat quick hands in there. So I do think he's kind of live to maybe catch Tafa early, but I do think that as the fight gets extended, once Hunsucker realizes he won't be able to get Tafa out of there and Tafa starts turning it on him, I think that Hunsucker's probably going to look for a way out. So for that reason, I'm going to have to side with Tafa here. I just really don't think the line should be this wide. But realistically, outside of an early knockout on Hunsucker's part, I really don't think Hunsucker's got much of a chance. But I do feel that Hunsucker's probably got a chance of finding the knockout early. We have seen Tafa hurt before. He has been knocked out. And I do think that Hunsucker's got a bit of power, and he does have, pretty explosive striking. He did land a pretty clean, 1-2 on Tuivasa. It's just that Tuivasa's super fucking durable, was able to eat that like nothing and return fire and eventually knock out Hunsucker. But I do feel that if he's landing some of those shots that he did against Ty on Tafa, I think he's got a decent chance of knocking him out. So the pick ultimately is going to be Tafa for me. I think he should be able to weather that storm, but not super confident that he can. However, I feel the under is probably the play here. Hunsucker's never seen the second round, and just the way he fights, he basically guarantees that, he's either going to knock his opponents out or he's just going to cave late in that first round, if he isn't able to get his opponents out of there. So under, probably the play. Don't really know if I want to take a side here. However, the official pick is going to be Tafa, but I think the bet is probably just going to be the under. And moving along, we have Raoni Barcelos versus Victor Henry, and no odds for this fight just yet. Was announced a couple days ago, but they still haven't released the odds yet. But Henry is going to be coming in short notice against Barcelos, so we'll start with him first. Henry, from what I've seen, doesn't look like too bad of a fighter. He seems to be pretty decently well-rounded in terms of his striking and his grappling. He's got decent volume, decent output. His cardio seems fine. However, the big takeaway, I think, from watching some of his tape is that it does look like he struggles a bit with the defensive grappling. His takedown defense doesn't look particularly good, and it does look like he can get stuck on his back a bit. Granted, these fights were from a little while ago. Wasn't able to find too many of his recent fights, but at least in the past, it does look like he's someone who has been, stuck on his back before. So a little concerning here because he'll be going up against Barcelos, who, is a very well-rounded fighter. He's got really good grappling, good jiu-jitsu, and then his boxing is on point as well. And Barcelos has kind of made a career of beating these UFC newcomers or prospects, even though I wouldn't consider Henry a prospect, but Barcelos has made a career out of beating these mid-lower level guys. And I don't think Henry's any different. In fact, I think this might be one of Barcelos' easier matchups compared to some of his other opponents that he's faced, like Nurmagomedov, even Taha and Valiev. So a decent step down in competition for Barcelos here and a pretty sizable step up in competition for Henry. So overall, I really like Barcelos in this spot. If I had to line the fight, it'd probably be at about like minus 300 for Barcelos because I just don't see a way Henry can really beat Barcelos here. Barcelos is probably going to have to slow down considerably for Henry to have a chance. Or, Henry could clip Barcelos with something. But, Barcelos still looks like a really solid fighter right now. He's getting a bit older, but, he still put on a solid performance against Valiev. Dropped him a couple of times. And Henry, not exactly a young prospect himself. I think they're actually the same age. So age probably not a big factor. The wear and tear probably in favor of Barcelos as well because, Barcelos hasn't really taken as much damage and he actually has fewer professional fights than Victor Henry. But I guess the big concern with Barcelos is that, he can be a bit passive. He's got decent power on the feet and pretty technical boxing, but he could just be a bit low volume at times. And I think that is what lost him his last fight against Valiev. He had Valiev hurt a couple of times in there, but in the other rounds that he didn't, he just wasn't keeping up with the output of Valiev, and that kind of led to him dropping 2 of the 3 rounds. So that is a bit of a concern for Barcelos, but I do feel he's got a pretty comfortable path to victory here in the grappling against Henry, assuming Henry hasn't made like crazy improvements to his game. But, you know, at this stage in his career, I just don't know if he's going to be shoring that up. So I do think that on the feet, Barcelos should be winning the boxing exchanges. Henry might be able to outwork and outvolume Barcelos over the course of 15 minutes, but Barcelos could just be landing the heavier, cleaner shots. And of course, Barcelos does have the grappling path if he does decide to take it. So I really like Barcelos here. Might put him in some parlays if the price is reasonable, but I just don't know where the bookies are going to open this line. I wouldn't take Barcelos as too juiced of a favorite because even though he should win, I just don't know enough about Henry to say that Barcelos should be a lock here or anything. But I do think this is a pretty favorable matchup for Barcelos, and he really should win this. So I'm going to go with Barcelos. I think he could get it done via decision, possibly submission if Henry hasn't really shored up his defensive grappling. And moving along, we have Gerald Meerschaert versus Dustin Stoltzfus, and Meerschaert's the minus 225 favorite. Comeback on Stoltzfus is plus 190. And we'll take a look at the underdog at Stoltzfus first. So, if I'm being honest, I really don't know what this guy's good at. I think he might be one of these guys who kind of just started in MMA. I don't know if he's got really a base in any martial art, and it definitely looks like he's still a bit green in the game as well. And I believe commentary did say he's only been training MMA for about like 7 or 8 years. So pretty much the guy just started training and then started fighting professionally on the Russian or the German regional scene, which, as we know, is pretty weak. So overall, just not really high on Stoltzfus at all. Rewatching some of his fights, on the Contender Series, I think he was losing that fight up until the arm injury, and then against Daukaus, he was getting beat up pretty bad in the clinch. I think Daukaus won that fight pretty dominantly. And I guess Daukaus is a pretty decent fighter, so can't hate on him too much for that performance. But, in his most recent fight against Vieira, Vieira was landing at will on Stoltzfus, and that really is a big red flag for me. Vieira really isn't a good striker whatsoever, and, he was basically just popping the jab off on Stoltzfus whenever he wanted. So I don't like the striking defense of Stoltzfus. I don't think he's a good offensive striker either. I don't think he's really a good grappler either. And, I guess he's kind of durable and maybe he's kind of strong in there, but overall, I just don't think he's really UFC caliber. And, he's going to be going up against Gerald Meerschaert, who is a bona fide UFC vet at this point. He's fought some pretty good opponents in there, and, he's a pretty well-rounded fighter. His striking's been rounded out pretty well, but, of course, he's got his jiu-jitsu base, which, I think he is a pretty solid, submission grappler. He's got decent wrestling, so overall, I just think that Meerschaert's a very solid fighter. He does struggle when he gets a step up in competition, but, he's been beating a lot of these mid-level guys at the UFC level. So I do think that overall, Meerschaert's just a much better fighter everywhere. I think that on the feet, Meerschaert's striking is probably better than Stoltzfus. Meerschaert has a very nasty body kick that he likes to throw. His striking is coming along pretty well overall. I mean, he was actually beating Muradov in his most recent fight in a lot of the boxing exchanges. He was landing clean on Muradov, actually, and he was eating some clean shots from Muradov also. So very impressive performance from Meerschaert against Muradov. But he has shown he's got, decent boxing against other mid-level guys as well. Darren Wynn, Eric Anders. But yeah, the big concern really with Meerschaert is going to be the chin. Historically, he hasn't been a super fragile fighter, but he did have 2 back-to-back knockouts, one against Heinisch and one against Chimaev. The Heinisch one might be a bit of an anomaly, but it looks like Chimaev might be the real deal here. So can't knock him too much for those, but, you do have to be concerned, with him getting put out in back-to-back fights in pretty devastating manner. So definitely a little bit of a concern there, but something I do actually want to add on in regards to those 2 knockouts is that he only got about like 3 months of rest between the Heinisch and Chimaev fights. So I don't think he fully recovered going into the Chimaev fight, and Chimaev was able to just fully take advantage of the fact that, Meerschaert might have been a little hurt still. And I feel Meerschaert's performance against Muradov might have kind of eased that a little bit because, he was eating some bombs from Muradov, and Meerschaert definitely was wobbled in that fight, but, he was able to dig deep, fight through it and eventually find the finish. So I don't know if I want to completely write off the chin of Meerschaert just yet, but I do think that, it is a bit of a concern still. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think that Meerschaert's got Stoltzfus covered pretty much everywhere. I think on the feet, Meerschaert's the better striker. I think he's the better grappler. He's got way more UFC experience. I just don't see how Stoltzfus is going to win this fight. So I'm going to pick Meerschaert here. I think he gets it done. The only concern is maybe Stoltzfus is able to clip Meerschaert, but I really don't think Stoltzfus has that sort of power, and I don't think he's that proficient of a striker that, he's going to be able to clip Meerschaert clean. But, this is MMA at the end of the day, but ultimately I think Meerschaert gets it done. I think he can get it done, however he wants. He could probably win a decision if he decides to keep it striking. He could take this to the ground and, just dominate Stoltzfus there, or he could probably just get the submission too. So I think Meerschaert is the side here. I'm probably going to look to parlay him up, but yeah, I think Meerschaert's I think a pretty safe play this week. I just don't think Stoltzfus is any good. And in the next fight, we have Cub Swanson versus Darren Elkins. And Swanson's the minus 210 favorite. Comeback on Elkins is plus 180. So we'll start with Darren Elkins first. The guy is, I consider him a bit of a pressure fighter. He likes to move forward. He'll throw volume on the feet. He's got decent offensive striking, but the issue with him on the feet is going to be the defense. The guy's super hittable. He's got a ton of scar tissue too, so if you're starting to tee off on him, the guy's going to get bloodied up pretty quickly in there. But overall, he is pretty durable, and even though he's getting touched up, he is going to continue to move forward, continue to throw volume. So generally he can make fights pretty close on the feet, regardless of how good or bad his opponent is. But the thing with Elkins is he can wrestle a bit too, and he is somewhat reliable to go there. He was hitting takedowns on Minner, he was hitting takedowns on Garagori. And his cardio is pretty solid, so he could actually wrestle for 2-3 rounds pretty good, no problem. But the big issue with Elkins is just the fact that he's super hittable. The guy's just blocking punches with his face the whole time, and optics wise, that's just really bad. And on top of that, he gets bloodied up pretty badly. So optics wise, it doesn't really do him any favors when it goes to the cards. He wasn't a really close fight with Landwehr, a fight a lot of people thought he may have won, but he lost because his face was just a bloody mess, and at the end of the day, Landwehr was landing a ton of shots on Elkins, and Elkins is going to be going up against Cub Swanson, another veteran of the sport, another very well-rounded fighter actually. Swanson, he's got good stand-up, and then he's got good jiu-jitsu as well, so very high-level fighter, a ton of UFC experience, and just very well-rounded overall. So a lot to like about Swanson. I definitely do think that he should be the favorite here. On the feet, I do favor Swanson a little bit more. I do think he'll be landing quite a bit on Elkins. I mean, everyone lands a bit on Elkins, but I do think he should be landing a bit more. There's going to be, I think, a decent, gap in terms of, the damage being done. And then, he's got solid jiu-jitsu as well. I don't know if Elkins is going to be able to take Swanson down and submit him. I do think that Elkins, there is a path to him for, in the wrestling. I think that Swanson's takedown defense isn't particularly great. He is decent off his back. He knows what he's doing on the mat, but, I do think that Elkins, if he's relentless with his takedowns, he could hit like maybe, 3 or 4 takedowns over the course of this fight, maybe even more. Elkins, he is someone who is super reliable to be hitting takedowns. But overall, I do favor Swanson in this matchup here. I think that he, should be able to keep it standing and, do enough on the feet to win a pretty close decision here. I just think that at this stage in both their careers, it's going to be a little hard for Swanson to just be blowing Elkins out of the water. Elkins, while he is hittable, he will be doing his damage as well. He will move forward and, he will be landing. So I do think that Elkins can probably keep it close on the feet, but I do think that Swanson should edge it. But, I definitely feel the line is wide at this point. While I do think that Swanson should win, I did say before that Elkins, he can keep this fight close, just with his output and the fact that, he'll keep moving forward. And then I do think that Elkins can probably hit some takedowns as well. He might not get a ton of top control time, but I do think that, in a fight that's close-ish on the feet, him hitting takedowns could be the difference between him like being able to steal the round or not. So for that reason, I definitely feel that Elkins is probably the value side here. I just don't think that Swanson's going to be blowing Elkins out of the water. I think both guys are, regressing a little bit. Elkins definitely a lot more than Swanson, but, I think both guys at this stage in their career, I just don't think that, either guy's going to be blowing the other out of the water, and Elkins super durable. So I think that this does go to a decision, and I do think that Swanson wins this by a pretty narrow margin. So I'm going to go with Swanson here, but betting-wise, I do think that Elkins is the value side. And moving along, we have Mateusz Gamrot versus Carlos Diego Ferreira, and Gamrot's going to be the minus 166 favorite. Come back on Ferreira is plus 146. And we'll start with Gamrot here. So, Gamrot looking like a pretty decent prospect right now. The guy's extremely well-rounded. On the feet, he's got decent striking. He's got good footwork, lots of side-to-side movement. Just kind of looks to pepper opponents, on the feet. And he does a decent job feinting the level change as well. Keep his opponents thinking. But I feel Gamrot does his best work when he is able to mix in the wrestling a bit, and I do think that's really where his strength lies, his ability to repeatedly take his opponent down. And, he is a pretty solid grappler when the fight does get to the ground as well. But overall, I do feel that Gamrot, he is a very well-rounded fighter, and I do think he's got quite a bit of potential in this division. It's hard to tell where his ceiling really is at because I don't think the guy's got a ton of finishing upside. I know he's coming off of 2 finishes, one against Holtzman and the other against Stevens. And those are pretty solid wins. But, I do feel that Holtzman's chin at this point is a bit cracked. And I really just don't quite know what to make of that Stevens fight just yet because it ended pretty early. And he was able to just get that Kimura off on Stevens pretty early. So I really don't know if we could take too much from that performance. But overall, I'm still inclined to believe that Gamrot is still a bit of a decision-nator. And he is going to be going up against Carlos Diego Ferreira, or CDF. I'm just going to call him CDF the remainder of this breakdown. CDF is, I think, a pretty legit anti-grappler. He's going to be a very tough matchup for Gamrot here because I think that for Gamrot's game to really work, he's going to have to get his wrestling going. Because on the feet, while I do think that he's a solid boxer, I don't think that Gamrot's super high level there. And I do think that he's much more comfortable when he's on the ground. And on the feet, I do favor Diego a little bit more. CDF's got, pretty heavy hands. He's got, good takedown defense, and he's got good scrambling and get-ups as well. So he's really going to be making Gamrot work for these takedowns. And, if CDF is able to keep this fight on the feet, he should have a bit of success because I do think that overall he is the better striker. And in prolonged striking exchanges, I could definitely see CDF landing the heavier, cleaner shots. Really, I just don't know how much success Gamrot's going to have in the grappling department because, like I said before, CDF, he's got good takedown defense, and he's really good at scrambling in transition and stuff to mitigate the control time that his opponents have. But more importantly, CDF is a fucking cheater. I mean, the guy will come in overweight against grapplers, and he is someone who will grab the fence as well. So Diego is, I think, going to be a tough fight for Gamrot. But, with all that being said, I think I'm still going to pick Gamrot here because, despite CDF supposedly being a good anti-grappler, he did lose his last 2 fights against 2 strong grapplers, one in Gillespie and the other in Dariush. Obviously, these guys are, top 10, top 5 guys. We just don't know if Gamrot's quite at that level yet. He very well could be, and, we could see him have enough success in the grappling to win a close decision here. But, ultimately, I just don't know if he's quite proven enough to justify laying, minus 160, minus 170 on him just yet. I do think that, he's got a path to victory here. And, I do think that CDF might be on a bit of a decline. He did get grinded out by Dariush, and Gillespie was able to break him in there. So for as much as I've touted him for being a solid anti-grappler, it does look like he's slipping a bit. But once again, it is against very high-level guys. The real question is just where Gamrot is at his career. And I just don't know if he's, quite good enough, or it's quite proven enough to show that, he's up there and that he can hang with someone like CDF. So I definitely like the Gamrot side. I think he's a solid prospect, but, I think this is going to be a prove-it fight for me. So Betting wise, it's probably dog or pass. This is a tough stylistic matchup for Gamrot, but I do think that Gamrot's on his way up and CDF is on his way down. So for me, this is going to be dog or pass. But as far as a pure pick goes, I'm going to go with Gamrot. I think he can win a pretty close decision here. I don't know if he's going to be blowing CDF out of the water. I don't know if he could push a pace like Gillespie, and I don't think that. I just don't think that Gamrot's the wrestler that Gillespie is, but he is a very strong grappler. So I think that Gamrot should be able to get it done here. Maybe win like a 29-28 decision. And moving right along, we have Raphael Assunção versus Ricky Simón, and Simón's the minus 275 favorite. Comeback on Assunção is plus 235, and we'll start with Assunção first. So I believe he does have a really solid jiu-jitsu base. On the feet, though, he's got very heavy hands. He can wrestle a bit. So overall, I think that, Assunção is a very well-rounded UFC vet at this point. He can be a little low volume on the feet. And, at this stage in his career, I think there are a few durability and possible, cardio concerns. He is coming off of a very nasty knockout. And it has been a little while since he's fought. So, that combined with the fact that, he is a little older, definitely some concerns for Assunção right now. But, he'll be going up against Ricky Simón, who, I don't think is a super dangerous striker on the feet. But, Simón is a very reliable wrestler. He's a very good wrestler. His boxing is serviceable, but, I really don't think Simón's out here starching anyone or putting on a boxing clinic. But, it's serviceable on the feet, at least enough for him to really get his wrestling going. And, Simón is someone who is very reliable to go to his wrestling. He basically shoots every fight, and, you could count on him to hit at least like 5 or 6 takedowns pretty much every fight. I don't think Simón's a massive, submission threat, but, he is someone who's got decent top control, and, he will continue to work to take his opponents down if his opponents get back up. So I think Simón is pretty reliable in that regard. He's got solid wrestling or solid cardio as well. So he could wrestle hard for 3 rounds. He's not one of these guys who's just going to wrestle you hard for that first round and a half and then just completely fade. He is someone who could go, a hard 3 rounds, good cardio, decent durability. I mean, he did get knocked out by Faber. That was a really weird fight, honestly. I think that might just be a bit of an anomaly because, rewatching that fight, Simón, he wasn't out cold. He definitely did get wobbled by Faber. I think Faber did have him hurt, but the stoppage, I felt, might have been a little early. Simón was on a single. He was moving and defending himself a bit. And Faber really only landed, I think, just a couple soft follow-up shots before the ref just stepped in and called off the fight. So I really don't think that Simón's chin is like bad or anything. I think that fight, he got caught clean, and it was a somewhat early stoppage. So I don't think I'm going to write off the chin of Simón just yet. So I do think that overall the durability of Simón shouldn't be a big concern at this point just yet. So for that reason, I think I have to go with Simón here. I actually like him quite a bit. I think that on the feet, it should be, somewhat competitive. I definitely might have to favor the power of Assunção a little bit. And, of course, he could definitely land a bomb on Simón. But, if he doesn't, I do think that once Simón gets his wrestling game going, it's going to be a really rough night for Assunção. I just think that, Simón being the much younger, probably the more athletic fighter at this point in their career, I think that Simón should be able to just hit takedowns, get control time, and maybe just wear on the cardio of Assunção. And I do think that as the fight drags on, it's going to favor Simón quite a bit because the big concern here for Assunção is just, he's starting to get a little old. And, unless he is able to catch Simón with something big on the feet, I just don't see Assunção being able to do enough over the course of 3 rounds to win this fight. So I really like Simón here. I think he's a decent parlay piece. Outside of just getting flash knocked out, I think that Simón should win a pretty dominant decision here. So the pick is Simón, and I think he wins 30-27 here. And moving along, we have Amanda Lemos versus Angela Hill, and Lemos is the minus 410 favorite. Comeback on Hill is plus 310. And we'll start with Lemos first. Looking like a pretty solid prospect, even though she is getting a little up there in age. I do think that Lemos is for sure riding a bit of hype. She could crack on the feet. She's coming off of a very nice knockout performance. two actually. She's coming off of a 2-fight knockout streak. So, she's definitely shown that she's got power. She's got good technique as well, very good counter punching. And then on the ground, she's shown that she could, wrestle a bit, and she does seem well versed, in terms of jiu-jitsu as well. So overall, I think she's, pretty well rounded. And as it appears, she's definitely can crack and has got knockout power as well. Granted, she's been fighting relatively low level competition, but she's looked pretty good in most of her fights. So overall, I do think that she's a really solid fighter. I do think that she's got a bit of potential in this division. And, Lemos, she's going to be going up against a veteran in Hill, who, is a kickboxer as well. Hill's got pretty high work rate, decent cardio. She's doesn't have the most power, but, she's got a solid work rate, and she is someone who could go pretty hard for 3 rounds. The big issue with Hill is probably going to be the takedown defense. The get-ups, very suspect as well. She's someone, you could, if you take her down, you could probably keep her on her back for an extended period. But outside of that, I do think that she's a pretty serviceable fighter. I kind of classify her as a bit of a journeyman at this point. If she's able to keep the fight standing, she could make it very competitive with a lot of fighters. But, historically, the fights that she's kind of struggled against, or fighters she struggled against, are ones that have been able to take her down and, kind of control her a bit. And taking a look at this matchup, I do think that could potentially be a concern here. But even on the feet, I think I might actually favor the striking of Lemos just a little bit more. I know that Hill's got a pretty high work rate, but I do think that, once Lemos gets the timing down, she'd be able to do a bit of damage to Hill. I think that overall Lemos is probably going to be landing the much heavier and cleaner shots. And, once she starts feeling the power of Lemos a bit, I think that Hill might be a little more hesitant to throw. Her volume's probably not going to be as great. And then, of course, I do think that the takedowns are going to be there for Lemos should she decide to take the fight to the ground. Hill, her takedown defense isn't particularly great. And if Lemos can take Hill to the ground, I think that she could have a bit of top time, maybe find the submission. I don't know how good the jiu-jitsu of Lemos really is, but I do think that she could get a decent amount of top control time on Hill should she want to take the fight there. The line definitely feels a little wide, but I think it's like somewhat justified because I really don't see Hill winning this. I think Hill's best path to victory here is likely to just win a volume-based decision, but I just don't think that's super likely here. I don't think that Hill is going to be just doubling up Lemos in terms of the volume, and I really do think that Lemos is going to be landing some pretty heavy shots on Hill. So even if this fight was 100% on the feet, I would favor Lemos, and over the course of 15 minutes, it could play out somewhat close. So I could see why the value side would be Hill, but I think that if Lemos is even able to mix in 1 or 2 takedowns in this fight, she should be able to win a pretty clear and dominant decision. And something I really quickly wanted to touch up on was just the fact that Hill, she is getting a little up there in age. At 36, she's not like super old or anything, but it is starting to get to the point where, fighters do start to regress a little bit. And we did see her look a bit slower in her last fight against Torres. Granted, Torres, very small, very compact, quick fighter in there. But, she was just, the speed advantage was just massive in that fight. And I do think that, partially it is Torres being quicker, but I do think that Hill is starting to decline a little bit. And Lemos, not exactly a spring chicken out there, but she is still relatively young in her MMA career. And she's looked pretty good recently. So if there is, in fact, a sizable speed discrepancy, there is a chance that Lemos could just blow Hill out of the water here. So, yeah, I'm going to go with Lemos. I'm pretty confident she should win this. I really just don't see Hill winning a volume-based decision over Lemos here. So the pick is Lemos. I think she gets it done via decision here. And in the co-main event, we have Belal Muhammad versus Stephen Thompson. And Thompson's going to be the minus 235 favorite. Come back on Muhammad is plus 200. And we'll start with Wonderboy Thompson here first. So, what can I say about this guy? He's an elite kickboxer. He's got very good movement on the feet. Phenomenal footwork. Really good distance management. Just overall, a very dynamic offensive striker. He's got a solid work rate. And even at this stage in his career, I do think that he's probably still the best striker in the division. I mean, he's just so good at, staying at distance, staying on the outside and just picking his opponents apart. He's got a very dynamic point fighting style. And historically, the only fighters that have really given him issue are other, counter strikers. So, kind of lulls him into a very low volume, low pace sort of fight. And he basically just kind of gets screwed by the judging because no one really knows how to grade those fights. And then most recently, it does look like, someone who can really aggressively pursue the grappling can have a bit of success against him because, historically, Thompson has really only fought other strikers. He's fought some wrestlers here and there, but, this was way back in the day, and I don't think they really went to wrestle-heavy game plans. But going into this fight, I think that, Muhammad is probably going to have to go to the wrestling if he wants to win this fight. Muhammad is a pretty solid, well-rounded fighter. He could do a bit of everything. He's got good boxing, decent wrestling and jiu-jitsu, decent cardio as well, and a pretty good work rate. So, the guy could just do a bit of everything. He's just not quite elite anywhere. And I just don't think he's much of a threat in terms of power or submission to really threaten a finish on anyone. But, he's just good enough to take advantage of some of his opponent's weaknesses. And, once you get higher up into the division, it's probably not going to be as successful. But I do think that Belal is definitely a top 15 guy, maybe top 10 guy in terms of, what he brings to the table. But taking a look at this matchup, I do think it's pretty straightforward. On the feet, Thompson should be the much superior striker. He should be able to just touch Muhammad up. Honestly, I could see him just picking Muhammad apart at distance on the feet. But I do think that Muhammad's going to go to the wrestling here. And I really think that Muhammad could probably have a bit of success, with the clinch work, with the cage pushing, and maybe a bit of the wrestling as well. I mean, I don't think that Muhammad's a fantastic wrestler or anything, but he has shown that he could go there. And, once he has Thompson up against the fence, he could probably, work on a single or look for a trip or something. Muhammad has shown that he can make a really grindy, clinchy sort of fight. He's done it before. And overall, he is someone who is pretty good at mixing in the wrestling and the grappling in a lot of his fights. But overall, I definitely do favor Thompson on the feet. It's just I don't know how much of this fight is really going to take place on the feet. And after seeing Thompson's last performance against Burns, I just don't think that he should be minus 230 or more against anyone who's shown that they could wrestle and grapple a bit. And I know that Muhammad isn't at the level of someone like Burns when it comes to the grappling, but Burns really wasn't doing anything groundbreaking against Thompson in his last fight. Like, it was really just a bunch of clinch work, cage pushing, and then a bit of lay and pray as well. So I do think that Muhammad could have a bit of success doing the same thing that Burns did in his last fight against Wonderboy in this matchup here. So for that reason, I'm going to pick Muhammad here, and I might actually just bet him because while I do think that Thompson's got a pretty significant advantage on the feet, and maybe he could just keep it standing and just piece Muhammad apart for 15 minutes, but that's kind of what people were saying in his last fight or in his last matchup against Burns, and Burns ended up just kind of just wall installing him. So I think that Muhammad could probably do something similar, and Muhammad I think is a pretty strong welterweight, whereas Burns, definitely big and strong and explosive, but at one point Burns was, a lightweight. So I feel the physicality is probably going to translate a little bit in terms of what Muhammad brings to the table. But really, I just feel the line is super wide here. I really don't think that Thompson should be this big of a favorite, after seeing his last performance. So yeah, I'm going to go with Belal here to pick up the victory. I think he could win a very grimy, low-pace sort of 29-28 decision. So give me Belal here. Might just put a little bit on him. Might just bet Belal by decision as well to juice up the odds because Belal's not really going to finish anyone. And in the main event, we have Derek Lewis versus Chris Daukaus, and Daukaus is the minus 140 favorite. Comeback on Lewis is plus 120. So I think this is a pretty straightforward fight to break down. We kind of know the deal with Lewis. He's not the most active striker in there. He gets backed up a lot. He's not particularly good with taking damage. We see him play possum a lot, but I do think, partially it's him also getting hurt as well, and him, looking to bait his opponent in so that he can land that big power shot on him. And for the most part, I do feel that Lewis is KO or bust, but, we have seen him win some very hairy split decisions, just because he's able to lull his opponents into very slow-paced fights. His opponents don't want to get too reckless in there. They don't want to get caught, so it ends up just being a very slow, very uneventful fight. But that's just how it is with Lewis. I mean, when you have knockout power like he does, power that, is carried through all 5 rounds, you're going to have to be a little more wary of, getting in exchanges with him. And, Lewis has shown that he can knock fighters out late into the fight and pretty much at any time. So I can definitely see Daukaus being a little more wary this fight, not looking to engage as much as he did in previous fights. And, I'm not even convinced Daukaus is going to look to be super aggressive here, because even in Daukaus' most recent fight against Abdurakhimov, prior to him, getting the knockdowns, it was a pretty uneventful fight. Daukaus was a little patient in there. I think he might have, respected the power of Abdurakhimov a little bit. Abdurakhimov was landing on Daukaus a little bit, so it was a pretty slow-paced fight until Daukaus eventually found the mark on Abdurakhimov. But overall, Daukaus does seem like a decent prospect. He's got solid boxing. He's got very quick hands, and then supposedly he's got solid jiu-jitsu as well, even though we haven't really seen it. And Daukaus, he is on a 4-fight win streak in the UFC, 4-0 in the UFC actually, and all 4 wins by knockout. But, I do have to say the guy's had a pretty soft schedule so far. I mean, Parker Porter, Rodrigo Nascimento, pretty low-level guys. And then Oleinik is a solid win, but, Oleinik's getting a bit up there in age. And, we know with Oleinik, if he's not able to take you down, he's kind of screwed on the feet. And Oleinik was just never able to close the distance on Daukaus, and Daukaus was eventually able to knock him out. And then the same with Abdurakhimov to an extent. Abdurakhimov is a solid, UFC level vet, but this is also a much older Abdurakhimov. We're talking about, 40 years old, super long layoff. And, at heavyweight, speed definitely is going to be a big factor. And on top of the fact that, Abdurakhimov coming off a long layoff, his timing might not be there, definitely had maybe a bit of ring rust. So pretty favorable matchups for Daukaus so far. And going into this fight, it's going to be, I think, a pretty decent step up in competition. Lewis, while he's a pretty one-dimensional fighter, he has shown that he could kind of have a good amount of success at the UFC level, despite being a pretty limited fighter. And honestly, this is a pretty tough fight for me to call, because this is a big step up in competition for Daukaus here. He's going to be going up against the heaviest hitter he's ever faced, and Lewis arguably top 3 in terms of heavyweight power. So very dangerous matchup for Daukaus. I don't know if Daukaus is quite at that level in terms of his boxing to be able to knock out someone like Lewis, because historically the only people that have been able to finish Lewis are very technical strikers in there, guys with good footwork, guys with solid power as well. The guys like Cyril Gane, JDS, and Daniel Cormier. Although Cormier went the wrestling path, but I do think you need to have a certain amount of technique and power to be able to get someone like Derek Lewis out. And I'm just not sure if Daukaus really is at that level. He's gotten 4 knockouts so far, but still very favorable matchups. I'm just not completely sold on Daukaus just yet. And something else I do want to mention is that while their measurables are pretty similar, same height, Lewis only about like a 3-inch reach advantage, I think Lewis has got a much bigger frame at the heavyweight division. Daukaus, he weighed in at about like 230, whereas Lewis weighs in pretty much at the heavyweight limit, and he doesn't look like he's very flabby in there at all. I mean, Lewis is a very big guy for heavyweight, and he's probably going to have at least like 30 pounds or so on Daukaus. So, Lewis going to be the bigger guy in there, and Daukaus probably going to be a little faster. Maybe, his hands are a little quicker in there, but, Lewis, he's got phenomenal timing in there as well. Really good accuracy. So I do think that Lewis could potentially catch Daukaus, even if, Daukaus is a bit quicker in there. I mean, we did see Abdurakhimov land pretty cleanly on Daukaus as well. So I don't think there's any reason for Lewis not to be able to get his opportunities in there. So as far as a pick for this fight, I think I'm going to go with Lewis here. I think obviously he's got the knockout potential. And even if this fight somehow does go to a decision, I'm not convinced that Lewis will lose the decision, because, like I was saying before, Lewis does have a style that really slows down the pace of the fight. And, if this goes a full 25, we could see a Daukaus, that's very hesitant, and we could just see a very low volume, low output sort of fight. And, we might just see Lewis win rounds just based off of having just the more explosive and bigger moments in there. But ultimately, what's really keeping me off of taking Daukaus here is I just don't think that Daukaus is quite on the level of striking as someone like Cyril Gahn or JDS in terms of their technique and even athleticism. So I think Daukaus is going to have a hard time landing clean combinations on Lewis. I think he's going to maybe be a little timid in there. And, if he's not careful, I can definitely see Lewis catching Daukaus as well. So I'm going to go with Lewis. I think he can potentially knock Daukaus out. And I do think that, you could probably just win a very low-paced decision as well. So I'm going to go with Derek Lewis. I would not advise just taking the knockout prop like you would against most Derek Lewis opponents, just because I do think there's a chance this fight might go the distance. Similar to the Ngannou-Lewis fight where both guys are a bit timid in there. But honestly, this is a pretty weird fight. So let me know what you guys think about this. Let me know if you guys are a little higher on Daukaus than I am, because ultimately I'm just not quite sold on Daukaus enough just yet. I don't know if he's got the hands to get Lewis out of there. So I'm going to go with Lewis here. I think Lewis can get it done by knockout.